Welcome to The Impact Effect, hosted by conscious leadership expert Tom Eddington, advisor to some of the world's most successful companies and CEOs, where each week we help executives, entrepreneurs, and organizers become more effective leaders while growing businesses that are making an impact in the world. And now, here's Tom.
Hi, welcome to the Impact Effect Network, a place where we discuss making business matter through conscious leadership. I'm Tom Eddington. My guest today is Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati, and she's here to engage in a conversation with me about conscious leadership and the role that conscious leadership plays in society today in the world, and how we can use business practices, and spiritual traditions to help shape and inform the consciousness of the world. Welcome, Sadhvi.
Thank you so much. It's such a wonderful joy to be with you.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure having you here in the studio with me. So I'd like to start out by just having you share a bit about your background and your story, and help our audience learn a bit more about you and the work that you're up to in the world.
Sure. It's always such an interesting challenge, because the real story isn't the story. And so, yes, there's a plot and there's a story, and I'll share it with you.
Yes.
And it's interesting and it's beautiful. And it's always so important to remember that isn't actually the real story. That the real story is just a story of grace, a story of truth, a story of oneness and love. And it's wrapped into this plot, but it's literally the wrapping, the form rather than the content. And so it's always important to remember that, so that we don't get lost in thinking that the content is the form.
Well, I love you sharing that, because it would be very easy for us to say, how did you get from Stanford to Rishikesh? And yet,
Exactly.
That's not what we're interested in talking about. That's not what the audience is interested in hearing about. It's an interesting piece, but that's not the conversation that we're here to talk about today.
Well, that's beautiful. And yes, because that, that is the plot, and that is the story. And that is just the wrapping of it. The real story is, as I said, a story of grace. I was carried. I went to India traveling with a backpack, not consciously looking for anything. And this is so important, because these days, so many people have this sense of, I'm not spiritual enough, I'm not doing enough. I mean, I'm sure people also in the business world feel that they're not doing enough business. That's just not what ends up in my lap. What ends up in my lap usually from people is, I'm not spiritual enough, so I'm not doing enough meditation, I'm not doing enough prayers, I'm not connected to God enough, and therefore I'm not worthy of having, or capable of having, or going to have in this lifetime that awakening, that truth, that experience, that knowing. And for me, the part that I love of my story so much, the plot of the story, is that I had done nothing on any conscious spiritual level at all. I would never have even identified as spiritual. So not only was I not religious, but I wasn't even one of those who say, oh, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And I had thought spirituality was very very focused, and you had to chant these mantras, and you had to sit at this type of a shrine in your house, and you had to have statues, and you had to know this, and you had to be interested in that, and I wasn't.
Mm.
And when I got to India, where, by the way, I had only agreed to even go because I was a very strict vegetarian. So I didn't even have a sense of, oh, I'm supposed to go to India. And so again, when people think, oh, well, how do I know? How do you know? And I did not have any sense at all of, oh, I'm being called to India. It was a trip that I agreed to take, and agreed to take only because I was a strict vegetarian. And so I thought, well, all right, at least in India, compared to Europe, where I had thought we were going to go, I'll be able to eat without grilling waiters about the, sauce of something or the stock of a vegetable soup. And when I stood on the banks of the Ganga River and had this incredibly powerful, unanticipated, unsearched for experience of, I can't say experience of awakening. It was an experience of being awake.
Mm.
There was no verb in it. There was no experience that I had of, here I am shifting from one moment into another. It was boom.
Mm.
Veil pulled off, experience of awakeness, experience of truth, experience of divinity, experience of oneness, experience of allness. And I had that without ever having done what on any objective level we would say, oh, well, you must, meditate, and you must pray, and you must yearn for God, and you must this, and you must that. And that feels so important to me because grace doesn't have any prerequisites.
Right.
Grace doesn't say, oh, you're worthy, okay, you're not, so no for you. And yet it happened. And for me, that was everything. And there was no turning back, even if I had wanted to, which obviously I didn't, but even if I had seen the truth so fully and so completely that now was who I was. That now was my truth. And so I stayed.
So I had a similar experience, and I'm asking this question because I already know the answer because of my own personal experience, but for the benefit of the audience. Having finished with a Ph.D. from Stanford in psychology, where did that academic training enter into that experience? Did you try and analyze it? Did you try and make sense of it? Did you try and explain it away?
For quite a while, there was absolutely no presence whatsoever of intellectual brain. Where it went, I couldn't tell you. It was not there. Yeah. There was no space whatsoever for thinking mind separation. Yeah. It was a cohesive wholeness that the thinking mind doesn't know what to do with. Yes. There was no way to hold life at an arm's length that the thinking mind and the intellectual mind needs. And it wasn't even just a cohesive wholeness within me. It was a cohesive wholeness of me and the universe and God and everything and all of it. And none of it could be held at that arm's distance that the mind needs to analyze and judge and be concerned. And that went on for a while. It was just, I could barely even speak. All I could say, quite incoherently, I am sure, was, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. And that went on for quite some time. My first recollection really of the thinking mind coming back into it was quite some time later, weeks later, when after I had already met my guru, Puja Swamiji, and he had already sent me to have this incredible experience of letting go and giving up pain that I was experiencing in my life and fears that I had been experiencing in my life in response to a question that I had asked about fears. And really I had only asked the question because he was looking at me and said, yes. And I thought, well, I have to ask something. And so I had asked about fear, and he had sent me to have this very powerful experience of letting go of my entire history, of my entire identity, of all of that which had happened to me in my childhood, in my life, that had created a personality, an identity, a pathology of anxiety and fear and all of that which goes along with it. And after he sent me to have this experience, which literally pulled all of that out of me, my thinking mind came back the next day, convinced that it was what had happened was impossible, that there was no way I had just given pathology to a river. And that the river had just somehow swept away my childhood and all of that which had happened and all of the ramifications of that in my life. And so my thinking mind came back with a vengeance, trying to do everything it possibly could do to actually make me again feel anxious and depressed and unworthy and split and all of. And it did whatever it could, and none of it worked. But it didn't give up easily, and so it was actually quite tenacious for quite some time in trying to reestablish its reign over my consciousness. And eventually it just dissolved. But that's my first recollection of it really coming back after that first moment on the banks of Ganga. So yeah, the academic mind really, by God's grace, just softened into the experience. And the only other recollections I have of it for quite some time were in humor. I remember it kind of sitting and thinking, oh my God, isn't this funny? Like, who would have thought? And oh my God, how to explain? And it doesn't matter. And isn't that funny? And just the beauty, the humorous beauty of it all.
So as you're describing that, I'm getting a sense, and I don't know if this is accurate, and I'd love to get your perspective on it, but I'm getting the sense that while the academic mind was trying to explain it away, I have the sense that there was a complete sense of serenity you were experiencing while this was going on.
Absolutely. And that's why I say it only came back in humor. It was a complete serenity. It had even after my ceremony of giving the pain and then the academic, intellectual, separate thinking, indoctrinated mind trying to bring it back, even in that moment, even as that mind ran like, the hamster on the treadmill trying to dredge something up, there was absolutely no shaking within me because I knew. Yeah. And what had happened was knowing also went from being a verb, went from being a doing, to being a place, a state. It was without beginning and without end. There was not an action of knowing. It was just a place, a state of knowing. And so there was nothing that could make me unknow. And so yes, it was very peaceful, but I love to laugh. And I have a lot of vivid memories of the early days of laughter, of the academic mind playing its game, and then also surrendering into this, oh my God, I was Phil Zimbardo's A+ student, and here I am, and what has happened, and isn't that funny, and I can't wait till I can tell him. And so there wasn't any sense of anxiety about it, just this ability to look at it with love. And in that looking at it with love, it just became sort of the humor of the universe, the divine play of the universe.
Yeah. And did you have that conversation with Phil?
I did many years later, actually, when a long story, but when I finally did finish my dissertation, because I hadn't completed my Ph.D. before coming to India. Long plot, uninteresting story. But when I finally did finish my dissertation many years later, I sent it to him and had said, I have no idea if you remember me. And he had written back, absolutely, my star student, which of course I thought, oh my God, how sweet, because I had just adored him. And it was so interesting because not one of the experiences that I had undermined in any way or violated in any way anything that I had learned from him. All it violated was my sense of separation in my mind, my inability to understand a greater wholeness. But it wasn't that a truth that I experienced was any more true than anything he had told me.
Right.
And so it actually gave me an even greater love and greater appreciation for him and for all that he had taught me. And I ended up taking those teachings and doing my dissertation on them, but looking at it from the other way, that, okay, so if we know that here is how you can get people who otherwise are healthy and functional to act in ways that we would call unhealthy or dysfunctional or pathological, can you use the same ways to take people who our academic world of psychology says should become pathological, so people who have been abandoned, abused, neglected, rejected, etc., and can you use them to ensure health, which was what we were doing, although not at all with that academic mindset, in a program of bringing in young, orphaned in some cases, literally, otherwise what I call virtual orphans, meaning they needed to be there. Children who had been abandoned, abused, neglected, rejected, and none of whom exhibited any pathology. I mean, hundreds of boys, never a black eye, never a bloody nose, never. And so I had done my dissertation on that and sent it to him and reached out, and we had a beautiful, beautiful reconnection. And so, yes, I did all of that. But that really, I think, was just an example of a manifestation of a truth that I already had realized, which was that place in which there is no separation, that it's not academics or spirituality, it's not science or spirituality.
Yep.
There is no problem between science and spirituality. There's simply two different ways of looking at exactly the same thing, who actually come to the exact same conclusions, assuming that the scientist or the spiritual person is looking properly.
Right.
And is looking with humility and is looking with openness.
Yes.
And so it doesn't matter which way you go in.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was a beautiful experience of reconnecting also with that world and seeing from that world something that I had been seeing only from this world. And to this day, that overlap of science and spirituality is one of my favorite topics, because people usually come into it with either or,
right.
which is better, and to actually be able to help people realize it's not that.
Yes.
It's yes and that what we need today so much more than either or is yes and so much more than the separation is the oneness.
Yeah, and we'll get into conscious leadership and my definition of it, but that's one of the dimensions of being a conscious leader, is to get out of dualistic thinking, because dualistic thinking is what's gotten us as a species into the state of the world that we are.
Yes, absolutely. I just actually day before yesterday was saying that sense of separation, that myth of separation rather, is at the core of everything that ails us, ranging from personal depression and anxiety and addiction up through the violence and conflict that we're having in our families or societies or nations or between nations, to that which is happening with the environment.
Yeah.
It's the exact same myth of separation.
Yes.
I experience it in me. It's depression. I act on it. It leads to addiction or so many other places.
Yes.
And eventually, it leads to the decimation and the destruction of our relationships and our countries and our peace. And it's what enables us to rape and destroy Mother Earth.
Yes. Yeah, and it all comes from that same place. Absolutely.
Which is where the cure is the truth of oneness.
Yes.
And an appreciation, by the way, an appreciation for the duality. It's not oneness of everything else is an illusion. An appreciation for the creation. I deeply believe that we've been given 5 senses with which to experience the creation, because we are supposed to experience it.
Right.
We've been given the ability to love, to cry, because we're supposed to love, we're supposed to cry, we're supposed to feel all of those things. It doesn't make any sense to either the scientist in me or the spiritual person in me that this perfect divine would give us all of these things simply for us to learn how to negate them and ignore them.
Right.
And so it's a rootedness in oneness, an awareness that oneness is the ultimate highest truth, and an appreciation and a joy of the experience of the duality. I can appreciate the smell of the flower much more when I'm seeing it as separate from me, because then I'm able to smell it with the very physical aspect that I have in my sense of smell and my nose, and and to love. That two becomes one is so exquisite. But you've got to begin from a place of two.
Right.
That conscious choice of, I'm going to sit over here in dualism because coming back together is so beautiful that I'm prepared to temporarily forget that it's all one, because coming from two into one is so exquisite.
Right.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Who you are is how you lead. Conscious leadership is an intuitive, intentional process requiring an open heart, an open mind, and a committed desire to fully own how you show up in the world. If you're a CEO, a solopreneur, or a community leader, Tom Eddington's ebook helps you amplify your strengths, making you the best version of yourself. Download the ebook today and become a part of bringing conscious leadership to the planet.
As you were describing your experience on the Ganga, I had a similar experience. I was in Assisi, and the words that I use are there was a knowingness at the cellular level. Every one of my human and non-human trillions of cells in my body had a knowingness that I had never experienced in my life. And my academic training, my life experience, my experience as a business person could in no way negate the experience. There was such a knowingness, and I had that same sense of serenity that you were describing, of just fully embodying this wisdom, this knowledge, this download, this transmission, this whatever I want to call it, or others would describe it as. And it's a profound experience to experience something like that.
Well, and the serenity comes because suddenly there's nothing you have to do.
Correct.
That which steals our serenity is stress, right? I mean, what's the opposite of serenity? Stress.
Right.
And that cause of stress is that sense of have to do it because got to get it or got to become it or got to whatever my thing may be. That which keeps us from being peaceful is that sense that in this present moment right here, in this breath, it is not enough. Something else must be done, achieved, become, earned, acquired,
right,
changed. And when you have that experience, the serenity is a serenity of perfection, a serenity of, okay, so then here I am.
Yes.
And nothing needs to be done. Which then, interestingly, paradoxically, makes you much more able to do.
Yes.
And that's the interesting paradox, is it's not that then you just sit in meditation forever. I mean, the Buddha, after having his enlightenment, he didn't just sit under the tree forever. He didn't just go into the denser forests. He actually turned around and came back to serve the sages, the rishis, the mystics, the prophets. They're doing after that experience, because although there is nothing that must be done, you end up being able to be utilized as a vehicle. You mentioned Assisi. Well, as St. Francis says, "O Lord, make me an instrument of thy mercy," an instrument, a tool, not a lump of clay.
To sit in a cave and
Exactly. An instrument. Well, if you think about the definition of an instrument, it's all about its utility. Nobody ever says, "Oh, that's a beautiful hammer. My God, it's gorgeous. Where did you get it? And it's covered with diamonds." And it's a good hammer. The entire value of that hammer is rooted in its effectiveness to be a hammer.
Right.
The value of this microphone is rooted not in how beautiful it might be, but in how effective it is as an instrument of conveying our voices.
Right.
And so that aspect of, "Oh Lord, make me an instrument," makes you realize it's not about, "Oh, let me be a lump of clay who does nothing. Thank you for that divine experience. Now I'm just going to sit here forever." Make me an instrument. And that awareness and that experience actually makes you the best instrument, because you become that vehicle then for the divine to flow through. And without the ego and without the separation and without that sense of stress of, "I must do this because I need it," that which needs to be done through you just happens through you.
Right. So when I use the term conscious leadership, the way I define it, very much in some of the vocabulary and some of the expressions you've shared, a conscious leader is one who is very self-aware. A conscious leader takes full responsibility for their actions in the world. A conscious leader is one who's showing up very intentionally with a clear sense of responsibility and obligation and commitment for those that they're leading, to create an environment where people can show up as their highest and best selves and be fostered to get done what needs to get done for the benefit of the organization, for the benefit of the people in the organization, for the benefit of those that they're serving, and to be that instrument in many ways. And to I'll make a distinction, and it may be counter to your way of thinking about the way Jung defined the ego, but for me, we're a spiritual being having a human existence. And this world, this third plane reality that we live in, was designed and built by ego. And so I make a distinction that there's the light side of ego and the shadow side of ego. And when we talk about the ego, oftentimes, particularly in the Western culture, we're only viewing it through the lens of the shadow side of ego. And so for me, when I think about a conscious leader and conscious leadership, it's an individual who is leading from a place of the light side of ego. It's someone who is not living their life and leading from a place of fear, the lower states of consciousness, of either I'm a victim of my life and circumstances, or my life is wonderful because I made it that way. But they're living from that place of synchronicity, that place of love, that place of trust, that place of flow. And so when I talk about conscious leadership and speak to it, I'm talking about an individual who is constantly aware of, where am I in my consciousness? Am I in that place of victimhood? Am I in that place of the shadow side of ego? Am I in that place of synchronicity and flow? Or am I living my life from that place of oneness? And without judgment, without self-criticism, aspiring to live from that place of love, that place of trust.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network, the world's first 24-hour on-demand business and leadership video and podcast network, bringing conscious leadership to a global audience.
Yeah, Mahatma Gandhi said so beautifully, he said, what's the point of that fast speed, which has no direction? And so I guess for me, when I think about leadership, the first and most important thing that occurs to me is a conscious leader is someone who knows where they're going. Because otherwise you can get a lot of hype around the movement. And we can go really fast. But the question is, where are we going?
Right.
At the end of this, where are we going to end up? And that vision is something that I think a conscious leader needs to have.
Yes.
And of course, not just where are we going to end up financially, because that's just a tiny piece of where, it's not even where you're going, it's a tool.
Right.
Where really are we going? And if you don't have a vision of where you're going, doesn't mean you're a bad person by any means, but it just means that you're not really qualified to be a leader. And you have to know where you're going. And so, and it doesn't matter whether you're a business leader or whatever type of leader you are. The question always is, well, where exactly are you taking people? And so in business, it means, where is this company going? But it also means, where are we as people going?
Right.
And so what are we going to be called upon to do as people? Because that's going to change us. Every thought we have is a vehicle that's taking us someplace. Every thought I have of competition, for example, or jealousy, is taking me to a destination of misery. And I know that because I've gotten on that train before, and 100% of the time that the train of competition has gone by and I've jumped on it, I have ended up at misery. So I have a 100% rate of train of competition, destination, misery. Train of jealousy, destination, misery. And so if as leaders, we are inculcating in people thoughts of competition, for example, thoughts of jealousy, thoughts of not enoughness. Any thought that is going to lead them to misery in their minds is a leader taking people in the wrong direction.
Yes.
So that, to me, I think would be the first piece of it. And the only other piece that I can think of, other than what you've said, which you've summed it up so beautifully, is that the leader needs to also know that he or she is not really leading. If I make it about me as the leader, even if I deem myself, certify myself as a conscious leader, I'm still going in the wrong direction. If I'm looking from within my mind of where are we going to go, what's the next step, even if I am conscious and good and full of love and aware and all of that, I'm still going in the wrong direction. Because then I'm not properly being an instrument or a tool for the divine flow. And I know that sounds very vague and amorphous, but if you look at everything else that is in the divine's hands rather than ours, which is basically the world of nature, it's very productive. It's very efficient. It's very organized. It's very prompt. Mm-hmm. It's very reliable. It's very prosperous. Everything in nature.
It's very abundant.
It's very abundant, absolutely. Everything in nature is producing and serving and doing its job. They don't even get weekends. No holidays.
And without complaint.
No complaint. You know, my guru, Puja Swamiji, always says, the Ganga River that flows before us, he says, Ganga flows and flows with no discrimination. She doesn't irrigate Hindus' farms and not Muslims, or Jews and not Christians, or rich people and not poor people. She flows for everyone. No discrimination. No hesitation. She never wakes up one morning and says, I don't know, I don't feel like flowing today. No vacation and no expectation. Where we are, people are praying to her, doing her arti, bowing to her. Other parts of the river, people are dumping their trash in her. But she flows for everyone. It's not, oh, you're nice to me, you bow to me, I'll flow for you. You're not nice to me, you ignore me, you dump your trash in me, I won't flow for you. And that's how nature functions. Mm-hmm. Whether it's trees giving fruit, whether it's rivers giving water, whether it's our environment, whatever it is in nature, it all follows all of those same principles. And so if we look at everything in the world that is operating simply as an instrument of the divine flow, without its ego getting involved, what you find is abundance and prosperity and efficiency and effectiveness and punctuality and all of these things that actually make up a really good business.
Yes.
And so if we can get back in tune with nature, and then if you look also throughout history at geniuses, whether they are entrepreneurial geniuses, whether they're scientific geniuses, what you find is they all say something really similar, which has to do with inspiration. Yes, there's the perspiration once the inspiration comes, so it's not that they just sat on their couch and it happened, but that moment of the idea, the creative flow, that came not in this moment of, constipated stress, but of open acceptance, open to the divine flow. And whether it came in taking a walk in the park, or it came in drifting off to sleep, or it came in watching a sunset, or it came in meditation, but it came at a time when I was open to the flow of the divine. And so if we can realize as leaders, so circling back to the idea that a leader needs to realize that they're not actually leading. If I'm a good leader, if I'm the one leading you, don't follow, because it means I don't actually know where I'm going. If as the leader, I am aware that I am just an instrument and that my prayer is not about let's get to the destination that I want to go, let these people follow me, but rather let me be more and more open to the flow of the divine. Let me be a clearer and clearer channel, vessel, vehicle for the flow of the divine. That's when you're actually able to have a leader who is guided. Because none of us can know where we want to go. I mean, nobody is clairvoyant. Nobody knows exactly. We know what the problems are. We know ideally where we'd like to be, peace, environmental sustainability. I mean, yeah, we know that. But exactly what is needed when? Exactly what the universe is going to throw into the soup? None of us knows. Which is why we have to be open to that flow. It's the only way to actually be an effective leader for sure, but an effective anything really.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Is your team tuned out? Are you looking for a powerful speaker to motivate and inspire your organization? Then Tom Eddington is the choice for keynote speaker at your next conference or event. Tom is one of the most sought-after business advisors and coaches in Silicon Valley. For over 2 decades, Tom has advised world-renowned CEOs and executives on how to catapult their organization's success, including Hewlett-Packard, NBNA Corporation, and Royal Dutch Shell. In his dynamic keynotes, Tom offers fresh new paradigms on how to create healthier, happier, and more purposeful workplaces while navigating change and generating higher degrees of success for organizations. For information on booking Tom at your next event, contact EDDINGTONadvisory.com.
So can you, just for the benefit of the audience, share a bit about your leadership responsibilities and how you take this philosophy, this way of being a leader, into your leadership responsibilities?
Well, for one thing, I'm always acutely aware that it is not about me, that it is not about my vision, but it is about the divine, and it is about what the divine wants from us. And that for me is always the prayer is, oh God, just clear from me all of that which blocks your flow. Just let me be a clear vessel, a clear vehicle of, you know what needs to happen. I mean, you've been doing this a lot longer than we have. Your creation is perfect. There's actually a great story that I love about this of a king who was a wonderful king, very kind king, very compassionate king. And one day a holy man came to his kingdom, and the king was walking the holy man through the kingdom, showing him all of these wonderful things that he did. He was showing about how here all of these people were being fed, and all these people were getting medical care, and all these people were getting education, and all these people got housing. The holy man's just nodding, and they keep walking, and they pass a river. And the holy man bends down and he picks up this rock, and he says to the king, "Tell your men to break this rock." The king is surprised. Why break a rock? But he does what the holy man tells him, and he gives the rock to one of his guards and says, "Break this." And the guard break the rock. And they open up the rock, and inside the rock, there's this pool of nutrient-rich water. And in the water, this tiny little frog is living. And the holy man says to the king, "And did you provide this for the frog as well?" And I love that, because it's like, really? We're the ones who provided all that education? We're the ones providing this food? We're the ones providing that health care? No. We're being used. Like the rock was used as the vehicle for the pool of water for the frog to live in.
Right.
Like the river bed is the tool for the river to flow in. We are being used as a tool over here for this and over there for that. And for me, that's really the core of how I live, and of course how I lead.
Mm-hmm.
And that, by the way, is true on both aspects of leadership. So whether it's the logistic leadership of programs and projects and humanitarian work, or whether it's the spiritual leadership. The spiritual teachings that I do, the satsangs that I lead, are exactly the same way. It's all about, oh God, you've heard the question. You've heard what this person sitting in front of me needs. Please let me get out of the way enough so that whatever needs to be spoken is spoken. It's never about me knowing an answer or me giving an answer or me doing any teaching. It's all about me just being able to get out of the way so that that which needs to be spoken can be spoken.
Right.
So the full spectrum of leadership for me is just really all about getting out of the way. And then, of course, all of these beautiful principles that you've given of love and openness and truth and honesty and all of that. And yes, but that's only possible when I get out of the way. Because if I'm there and it's about me, then none of those other things is possible in any real way. I mean, you can go through the motions, you can do the drama of love, and you can do the drama of consciousness. But it's not real. You're just kidding yourself. And then these are the people who then show up in India as the, multi-millionaire leaders, and the doors close and they cry and they're miserable. And because if it's not real, you may be able to fool everyone else, but you're going to suffer.
Right.
Which means that you may have the speed, but you don't have the direction. Because if you're suffering at the end of the day, you're not a leader. You may be a great boss. You may be a great CEO. I mean, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that you're not really a leader because you don't know the direction.
So when you're given leadership responsibilities, and we all have our interpretation, our perspective on what we think is the right direction, we all have the shadow side of ego that will creep in. We have people around us who are telling us what they think is right. We also have the divine channeling through us. How do you navigate that decision-making process? How do you, as a leader, figure out which truth is the right truth and which is the right direction?
Well, so we've got, as you say, our divine inspiration. We also have, though, values and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if we take for a moment that divine inspiration out of the mix, because I can just imagine a lot of people saying, well, I don't have access to that. So that sounds really nice. I don't have access to that. So the first piece of that is you can have access to that. Do not write it off. This is where the practice of meditation comes in. And in the meantime, you have access to your core truths. And what we all know, and this is science, it's spirituality also, but we'll take it from science for a moment. What we all know is that telling the truth actually feels a lot better than telling a lie. A lie detector test obviously has no idea what's true and false. It's measuring your galvanic skin response, which is things like your blood pressure, your pulse, the moisture on your skin, which is the stress response. So lying is stressful. And it's stressful on enough of a physiological level that a machine picks it up. Telling the truth feels better, even when we know, oh my God, nonetheless, it feels better. Being in love feels better than being in hate. Sharing with someone, giving to someone, feels a lot better than stealing from people. And again, we've got the science to back it up. We've got the science of places like Stanford that take students and they send half of them out to do something that they enjoy doing, like going to a party or the movies or shopping, and send half of them out to go out and be altruistic. And they bring them back and they measure their levels of happiness. And what we know is that those who have gone out and done something for other people actually are happier. So we know that helping people actually feels good. So we have our own internal sense, even if we don't call it divinely inspired or divinely connected. Every one of us knows truthfulness, love, sharing, giving. It feels better inside. My digestion works better. I fall asleep easier at night. My pulse, my blood pressure, it all is better when I'm honest and caring and all of these things. And so you've got that as your own internal anchor. And the concept that somehow business needs to be a rat race is a lie. The idea that somehow prosperity and abundance in a physical, tangible, palpable way is only for those who act in separation is a lie. And it's a myth perpetuated by those who are so addicted to living in their egos that they want to convince everybody that that's the only way to do business. There's so many examples, and I'm sure you've got way more examples even than I know, because this is your world, of people who are phenomenally successful business people from a place of compassion and truth and love and openness. And so we know that you actually can use your own internal values as your guide. And I would use those over the advisors. There's a lot of spiritual stories and parables of the not quite right advisor leading people into really very bad decisions.
Yes.
And so it doesn't mean don't take advice of your advisors, but it means don't
use discernment.
Yeah, exactly. And don't give up. Don't abdicate fully responsibility and your own ability to think for yourself to people who are not leaders. If they were leaders, they'd be leading, you'd be the advisor. If you're the leader, and if you are owning that role as a leader, what it means is that you've got something in you that people want to follow, or that people should follow.
Right.
Check in with that. And lastly, I guess on a purely objective level, but one that always works for me, is this concept of oneness. And so, for example, what is the impact of the decision that I'm making on not just the stock market value of my company or the profits of this quarter or even the money in the pockets of my employees, whether they're 5 or 5,000. But what is the impact on the suppliers? What is the impact on the land upon which the cotton that my clothes are made from is grown, and the cotton that's being grown non-organically with horrendously toxic chemicals because it gives a better, harvest, and we lose less and it's cheaper, but the toxic chemicals are now flowing into the river that's causing illness and death for everybody who lives in that area. And the farmers themselves are getting cancer, and their children are being born with birth defects. What's really the bottom line? When we talk about bottom line, our bottom line is so far from the bottom that it's scary.
Yes.
And if we actually take our bottom line to the bottom, it's also a very good way to make decisions. What are the ripple impacts of this decision? On our company, for sure. On my employees, for sure. But beyond that, on everyone who is in the chain of whatever it is we are producing or supplying, and ultimately onto the earth and all of our sisters and brothers with whom we share it.
Thank you. Maybe we could spend just a couple of minutes talking about your programs and some of the work you're doing.
Sure. What part about it?
I'd love to hear the work you're doing around peace, the work you're doing around reforestation, some of the spiritual work that you're doing.
Well, it's all spiritual. And I seriously mean that, because the teaching is, when you meditate, you have an experience of a loss of the sense of where you end and the world begins. Many, many, many people, most people, within even early days of meditating, have an experience of losing where their leg ends and the cushion begins, for example. Or there's a fan blowing overhead, and where when you close your eyes to meditate, you can distinctly feel the air on one side of your face. After a while, it almost feels like it blows through your face. And okay, neurologically, we know about proprioception and what's happening in the brain and whatnot, but the felt sense experience is, I've lost that sense of where I end and the world begins. I've experienced a greater sense of oneness. And even if it's only with me and the cushion upon which I sit, or the air in the room where I'm meditating, nonetheless, it's the beginning of an experience that, hey, I'm not alone over here. We're all connected, which means that the children who are dying of starvation, the women who are dying in childbirth, the trees that are being cut down, the rivers that are being polluted, well, they're all me. And so the service is a service that stems not from a sense of, oh, well, we're a good humanitarian organization and so we do good humanitarian work, or even we're good spiritual people and so we're serving. But ultimately and ideally, when it works at its highest from a place of self-serving self. My favorite way of thinking about this is if you fall and you injure your right leg, your left leg is going to take up the extra weight. And we call that limping. And really what it is the self recognizing self. So no one ever had to say to the left leg, hey, do me a favor, would you mind? Great, wonderful humanitarian left leg. Could you pick up some extra weight? It does it automatically. And if you hurt your right leg week after week after week, the left leg never says, oh, again? Like, forget it. I did this last week. Let him pick up the extra weight. And if a week after hurting your leg, you get a fever, and then you get a sore throat, and then you injure your elbow, the body's going to keep responding. It never says, forget it. I'm not going to do fever because I already did knee injury and leg injury and cold. There's an awareness of self. And so the service is really an extension of that spiritual awareness. And so if you start to grumble and complain and not serve well, my guru's never going to talk to you about your service. He's going to talk to you about your meditation. There's a problem in your meditation if you're not serving well. So that all being said, we say yes to pretty much everything. Whatever it is that lands in our lap as something that needs to be done. And so we run a variety of free education programs, free schools, free vocational training, empowerment programs for women. We are very, very active in programs for water, sanitation, and hygiene. We are doing a lot of work for women's empowerment and protection of girls and all of that. We're doing lots and lots and lots of tree plantation. Did you know that trees are pretty much the answer?
Yes.
Good. So I knew this. Ariel had told me that you were a tree person. Because where we are, for example, and I imagine much of the world, we think of the source of the Ganga River as the Gomu Glacier. But that's the source of part of it, of the Bhagirathi that comes down. But the flow of Ganga is actually sourced from trees in the mountains that become the tributaries.
Right.
And so we do lots and lots of tree plantation. And yeah, massive, massive tree plantation programs, particularly fruit-giving trees, because we're planting them in schools. So we have a My Tree, My School program of getting kids to plant trees that then will bear fruit. So we give big saplings. And the government does in a lot of schools what's called a midday meal program. But fruit is considered a luxury. And so with the fruit-giving trees, what you end up with is all of the benefits that a tree gives, but also fruit for the children to have. It also, where we are, is crucially important for holding the mountains in place. We've got massive, massive landslides every year when the monsoons come and the mountains just collapse. And the deforestation is a massive component of that, and the tree plantation is also there to hold the soil in place.
For the benefit of our listeners, what's the one thing you would want them to take away from our conversation today? And what's the one thing you would want them to do?
To take away from the conversation is that your greatest gift to yourself, your lowercase s self and your capital S self, and your life, and therefore, of course, your company and followers, but much more than that, your role, your purpose, is to get out of the way all of what you think you know, all of who you think you are, not permanently, but long enough and fully enough for the divine flow to flow through you enough for you to actually experience who you are and what you know. That's what you're here for. And at the moment, we're all so clogged up with what we think we know and who we think we are that there isn't any room for that flow. So get out of the way and see what flows, and trust what flows. And to do, plant a tree. Plant 10 trees, plant 100 trees, and plant the tree both outside and inside. I guess that's two things, but I'll take them as one. Plant trees outside and plant them inside. Trees of oneness and love and truth. Growth inside. And actual little trees outside, ideally oak trees, which give 40,000 gallons of water back into the environment every year. So if you can plant oak trees, plant oak trees. Otherwise, plant any trees. And plant the seed within yourself.
Well, thank you. The final question I would ask is for the benefit of our listeners that want to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to reach you?
Well, there's lots of ways. There's lots of best ways. The listeners who want to come to visit us in Rishikesh on the banks of the Ganga in the Himalayas would go to parmarth.org, parmarth.org, which is our ashram, Parmarth Niketan. Those who want to know more about the work for water, sanitation, and hygiene would go to washalliance.org. They could also go to sadhviji.org, which is my personal site, and could direct them to all of our other sites, and that's sadhviji.org.
Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you so much for all that you're doing here with the podcast, of course, but much bigger and deeper with what you're doing in the world.
Thank you.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Thank you for joining Tom Eddington on the Impact Effect. Visit impacteffectnetwork.com to connect with Tom and discover additional episodes featuring today's top leaders making a global impact through conscious leadership in the world today.